everything that you should know and would want to know about Professor Leone is in the program. What I'm going to attempt to do in a very short time is to tell you about the man I know. I met Mark about 8 years ago, I think it was. Just before he went to talk with the Tillmans about doing a dig at White House. He had a passion for it, and he had a real interest in learning about the stories that Frederick Douglass talked about in his book. And he wanted to see what he could discover about the slaves that lived there. But before he could do that, he wanted to talk to the people who were descendants of the slaves who lived there. So he came to St. Stephen's AME Church in Unionville, the home of many of the slaves from the White House. And he wanted to talk to the people there to find out what they would like to know about the White House and their ancestors. I think that's very important because his concern was that he get the information from us, do it with dignity and with honor. And that's what he did. He talked to my aunt, who many of you know, Martha Green, to find out especially what she wanted. She was the matriarch of our church, the mother of our church. And I think she was about 90 when he came to visit. And the one thing, almost the only thing that she wanted to know was, did the slaves have a religious life? Did they have some way of worshiping? Now, many of us wanted to know many other things, about their life there. But that's what she wanted to know. And so he made a point every time he did a dig to try to find that out. And when he did find something, anything he found out, he would send it back to me so that I could get approval from my aunt that he was on the right track and doing the right thing. Really, if you know my aunt, you would understand, and many of you do. But I just want to tell you that the work that he's done, especially for African Americans in the Talbot County community, are going to be excited about, warmed about, happy about, because it talks about our ancestors, and you'll learn in some cases where some of us have come from, and you'll learn a lot about the life that they lived there. And everybody else will find that this is a strong piece of history that we all can connect to, understand, and talk about to each other as much as possible, because that's what we really want, to open a dialogue of talking about the life and what we learn. But you're in for a treat, and I want you to welcome with me Professor Mark Leone. Thank you.
I want to begin by thanking Harriet, who has carried me through this. I want to begin by thanking Katie Glendaniel, who has carried everybody else through the details, and who is, I'm going to take credit for this, my own former student. And I want to thank my wife, who has listened to this and softened it a lot twice. This morning was brilliant. Last night was brilliant. If it has a quality that I can characterize, it sheds light on what has happened here. This essay takes what is still in the ground here and reflects it into the future as a commitment to research on behalf of the University of Maryland and for all of us acting together to see what the ground around us can yield for the future. On the surface, this essay is going to be about food, and we all know there's nothing wrong with that. But it is what people have made of food for the last 250 years that becomes what's in our stomach that makes our brains work. We have learned during the last 6 years that my undergraduate students, graduate students, and I have been excavating at White House that we cannot improve on Frederick Douglass. His descriptions of slave life at White House in the 1920s have served its purpose. It was how I began to look for his observations archaeologically, however, that what is important. Because we are anthropologists, our ability is to take excavated material and make a different image, one suitable to our needs now, and we must build on Douglass's legacy of seeking freedom and recognition while doing that. Our current task is to satisfy two modern needs, one plain and simply understood, one much less so. The obvious need is to write a history of Talbot County, the Eastern Shore, and the greater Chesapeake region that documents, creates, celebrates, and makes apparent the equal history made here by enslaved Africans and modern African Americans. And I don't see any particular difference between the two, except a chronological one. This will be a big history, a full history, an early history, and a different history. This will take a long time, but it has begun. It began in the 1960s with Shepard Creek, went on with Boyd Gibbons, and continues with Harold Anderson. But the statue everyone sees today, and which stands now uncontested, signals that this other history is ready to be acknowledged and written down. The history that seems not so needed is just as needed. The time has passed here on the Eastern Shore for picture book histories of lovely plantation facades, old boxwoods, nice water views, cornices, mantelpieces, lawns, and surviving wellheads. Let's agree to go beyond Henry Chanley Foreman, the Wye Oak, and very beautiful photographs. Let's make a pact together that we who live and work here deserve the kind of detailed, vibrant, regional histories that people in England, Massachusetts, Virginia, and Utah's Mormons even give to themselves. Let's use the vast, rich documentary record and the astonishingly intact 18th century archaeology here to know better where we sit, what we own, what patriotic acts occurred here, and what our earlier generations did for freedom. That's what Mrs. Green wanted to know. How did we become free? It is not a journey in time. Therefore, let's put aside for a while the picture of violence Douglass created. Not because it was wrong, it certainly was not. If we celebrate only Douglass for what he said about the Eastern Shore, there is no room for what else went on here, for what is going on here now, and for what we together want it to become. The statue doesn't point backwards to history. The statue points forward to discovering a past that was creative and that can be creatively used to say who we are and who we are becoming. So that statue is for the next 50 years, not for the last lost 150. It is a time for a full integrated history. Everybody here knows that White House is amazing, awesome, wonderful, and generously maintained by Lloyd family descendants. Richard Tillman said to me, and he actually did this, half of Talbot County has come here, and I'm saying on purpose. My point today, using anthropology, is to say that we can go beyond the uniqueness that draws us all to White House and use it as a model to make a set of discoveries that begins the newer and more general histories we know we need in order to see ourselves for who we have already become. Everyone eats. That's general. People grow food, cook it with recipes, and throw the remains out. All these processes leave archaeological remains, and we have them all from White House. The new picture involves native plants, medicinal plants, rare plants, African American gardening, what we can tell from discarded and excavated food bones, the pollen from the famous greenhouse, the Lloyd family's 19th century cookbooks, and 18th century scientific gardening. We have a lot of information on the origins of Southern cooking and the use of the environment that helped to create it. The general picture that Frederick Douglass always stressed was nationwide, even worldwide. He wanted freedom, the vote, democratic government. He was not just talking about Talbot County, the Eastern Shore of Maryland. He was talking about everywhere, including a critique of institutional Christianity and the vote for women. In this sense, he was a philosopher and a scientist, and we certainly heard that beautifully done both last night and this morning. Food falls into a similarly large general category. We grow, we cook, we eat, we discard the remains. Today, we have come so close to demonizing eating and food that we have made the topic trivial, sometimes even toxic, but it isn't. Please, for the moment, put aside obesity, E. coli, potato chips, McDonald's, Nestle's, and the hopelessness, the true hopelessness of connecting agribusiness to cooking at home using the stove. Food isn't any of that at all. Food is central and we know it, but we do not know its origins. We have some of those origins in black-white relations at White House, and by extension at every plantation in this county and around the Bay. I want to begin with our analysis of pollen from the greenhouse at Y. While the greenhouse is unique because it still stands, there were a lot of others that don't. We excavated the rooms in the greenhouse and collected fossil pollen and had it analyzed. On this analysis, we began to make our arguments about African American gardening, including uses of plants for food, for medicine, and for household utensils. The greenhouse at Y is no stranger to you, and you have seen many images of it, and this mock-up was provided by the university, and it shows you in three-dimensional form what it looked like, what we think it looked like in the late 18th century when it was built. We dug the building in two different phases, 6 months apart. Our major discovery in the first phase was to identify the northwest room on the back of the greenhouse as a place where a black family lived. It had broken dishes, buttons, sewing equipment, and a West African bundle at the doorstep, and bones from meals all buried in a level that dates from 1775 to about 1880, which is actually when enslaved African Americans lived in a quarter on the back side of the greenhouse. There was a dirt floor, a big hearth, a loft, pegs along the back wall, and a small corner cupboard. The inexpensive, unmatched dishes and the African spirit bundle are archaeological markers of slavery, not absolutely, but real likely. We took pollen samples from the deeply layered floors of this quarter living space. We took lots of pollen samples from the main room of the greenhouse, which is what you're looking at. These were all analyzed for us at the University of Massachusetts, Boston by Heather Trigg, who is both an archaeologist and a palynologist. A palynologist analyzes what we call fossil pollen. There is very little pollen for citrus plants in the greenhouse until after the 1820s. Douglass saw oranges at Y, but they were rare before this time. But from the beginning in the greenhouse, there were pond lilies, water soldiers, and in the slave quarter, there were bananas and plantains. Pond lilies and water soldiers grow in tubs of water. But we ask ourselves, what is plantain pollen doing in the greenhouse slave home in such significant quantities? But it is the amazing array of plants that comes next that is the real